This show has been brought to you in part by Bogart Extractors, an industry leader in hydrocarbon extraction. Bogart machines have been used in licensed extraction facilities all over the world and are available in small or large capacities for any scale operation. Call Bogart at 855-553-3887 or visit them at www.bogart.com and get the right equipment for your lab today. Are you ready for liftoff? Don't miss Canada's #1 cannabis conference and trade show, Lift & Company Expo, coming this May 12th through the 15th to the Metro Toronto Convention Center. Level up your industry intel at the Lift Cannabis Business Conference. Plus, connect with movers and shakers from across the cannabis industry and preview new products and services from 250 plus exhibitors. Plus, everyone loves Lift & Company Expo's prizes, live music, and more. Visit liftexpo.ca for tickets. That's liftexpo.ca. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Deadhead Cannabis Show. Yes, you have not misdialed. This is the Deadhead Cannabis Show and not the Jimi Hendrix Cannabis Show. But we had a little fun there with the boys playing around with what at the time was a relatively brand new Hendrix tune. But let me turn it over to my co-host, Rob Hunt from lovely California, who is feeling better and ready to rock and roll with us this week. Rob, tell us about that clip and the show and what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, yeah, as you know, I always try to find timely clips based on when we're recording, but that is from 4/21/1969 from the Ark in Boston, and it was the only time that the Grateful Dead played Foxy Lady. So I wouldn't say it was necessarily the best attempt at it, but give props to Garcia and the boys for trying it. But I will say that it kind of led into a really good run in a venue that they played, I think, 9 shows at that year, including their New Year's run. So it was really the first time that they were trying to build a real fan base in the Boston area, and throwing a little bit of Hendrix, I'm sure, didn't hurt. But that was a tape that I wore to death back in 1992 and listened to all the time, basically, because the Foxy Lady led into a Dark Star St. Stephen the 11 Love Light afterwards, and those are significantly better as they're working on their own materials.
Well, look, I have no doubt, but as you and I talked about before this show, for God's sakes, this is what the Grateful Dead is all about. If nothing else, just getting up on stage, and it may have just been that as they were starting the set, Garcia said, "What the hell?" And maybe I would love to know the story behind what got him to even start doing it. But it's like this. Don't forget, this is April of '69, and as we've talked about in the past, at the end of February, beginning of March '69, they did that run at the Fillmore West out in California, and the third night out there, they encored "Hey Jude," and Pigpen sounded horrible doing it, but it's loved. Deadheads love it because this is the Grateful Dead going up and playing a relatively new Beatles tune and butchering the hell out of it, but everybody knew what it was and had fun. And same thing here. This tune was released, I think, in '68, maybe '67. So, it's not that much farther down the road. Garcia's like, yeah, let's have a little fun with it. It doesn't sound great, I agree, but I just love the fact that, boom, at that moment they improvise, and then, of course, you're right, where they go with it from there is what really makes it special. But it's a great example of the Dead, I think, at a period of time. We've talked about this, primal Dead era of, 1969, and, they knew how to have a good time and enjoy themselves, too. It's good to see. Good to hear.
Yeah, for sure. And oftentimes when we're also trying to figure out which shows to put on here and which to cover, we try to find other things that it kind of links to. And one of the reasons I picked this one is the run from 421, 422, 423, obviously, is sort of coinciding with the 420 holiday. And also on top of that, the venue that they played at, the Ark in Boston, is still around, but it's no longer called the Ark. It turned into a place called the Boston Tea Party for a while, then it became the Avalon for a while, and now, for the last 20 years, it has been the House of Blues. And it's a massive venue that's on Lansdowne Street, right next to Fenway Park, right next to the dispensary that I'm opening called New Dia Fenway. And more importantly, it's opened by big fans of the Grateful Dead. Dan Aykroyd, who named the House of Blues brand after the work that he did with the Blues Brothers, which obviously was he and John Belushi back in the late 70s. And I use that as a segue because we have an exceptionally fun and special guest today joining us, one of the absolute OGs of the cannabis industry, like the person that really brought the first licensed cannabis dispensary to the United States, in Lynette Shaw. And Lynnette, I'm super happy to have you on the show, but I also picked the show I did because I know you've got some ties to the Blues Brothers, and figured it'd be nice homage to kind of get things kicked off. But how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm honored and happy to be here. I think this is a great show. And the Blues Brothers, I met John Belushi in West Hollywood when I was up and coming singer, and I also had the best pot in town. And my manager hooked me up with John to make sure he had some nice pot. And I said, "Hey, John, I'm a singer." He goes, "Really?" He says, "Can you really, really sing?" I said, "Yeah, I can really, really sing." So he sent Blue Lou Marini and brought me to the amateur night, and I blew the doors down because I can really, really sing. So then he brought me to the pro night, and there was the Blues Brothers band, and I blew the doors down with the real original Blues Brothers band because I can really. And I was in the band for 4 months until John died.
Blue Lou was the sax player, is that right? Lou Marini?
Marini. He was my buddy in the band there, but I played with them all, and it would have been an amazing thing. But John left us 5 days before my contract party, and then they were chasing after me for information because I was the weed girl to the stars. And now that there's such things as statute of limitations, I can talk about this stuff. But oh man!
So Lynnette, let's jump in there. What was it like selling weed in West Hollywood in the late 1970s? I mean, if you were a weed dealer to the stars, you must have had a lot of other experiences outside of just selling to Belushi and the Blues Brothers. What was it like, kind of in that period?
I was protected. I had worked out a deal, and I had protection. I had a bodyguard at a close distance. And I was allowed to sell because of the organization. I was allowed to sell at the Rainbow, the Roxy, the Whiskey, the Starwood, the Troubadour, and the Disco Joint.
What year are we talking here, Lynnette?
1979
Thank you.
to 1982. So I started selling weed in West Hollywood in 1978. I went there as a union musician, and I had studio gigs, but that wasn't really cutting it. And I started selling weed on the side. Then because I had the best weed in town because I'm from Northern California. Then I got discovered by my friends at the Rainbow, and they hooked me up with all the stars because I had the best weed in town, as I still do. And I'm a real good singer, and I'm a classically trained studio musician. So I started getting more gigs, but then I met John, and everything changed. And then I met everybody, and everybody loved my weed. And then he left us, and they blamed me for a while, and then the real girl went off to Canada, and then they wanted to investigate me, and they wanted me to rat out the Blues Brothers and all the other bands, like Motley Crue were big fans of my weed. This is when it was really dangerous, but I had protection, and I was West Hollywood, and I was a nice girl that could sing, and I was all cute and everything. I just slid right in, slid right out, and very discreet. It was spy versus spy stuff. You had to have plans. You had to have protection. You had to keep close track. You had to check in and not carry too much money. But I was safe, relatively safe, until John died. And then all bets were off. And there was riots in front of the Rainbow because they wanted to get me and question me. It had something to do with hard drugs, which I did not. I had to leave town. And I left town for 25 years. I never went back to West Hollywood because it was like, they're going to lynch me for something I didn't do? I said, screw rock and roll.
Wasn't Robin Williams with John Belushi that night? Wasn't those all the stories I remember reading about? You know, with all due respect to you, I think it's kind of nice.
I was supposed to meet him that night with the weed, and here's the critical part that I had to work this out in my head. John sent me up to Northern California to get some weed because I was out of weed and so was everybody else. It was dry in West Hollywood. And apparently I was followed by an agent or DEA out of West Hollywood, and my guy, I went to go score the pot, and he was getting busted, and I evaded arrest, and I had to hide, and so I hid that night, and when I called in that night, I called down to my manager who called to John and said, well, Lynette can't make it, her guy got busted. And so apparently he overdosed that night because he didn't have any cannabis. And by the time I had replaced the stash and could head back to Hollywood the next morning, he was gone. And everybody was looking for me because I was supposed to be there that night. So this was his fault. It's not my fault. A lot of people thought they could have saved him. He sent me to get cannabis to get him off the hardship. And I didn't make it back in time. And so I had to work this out a lot in my head, you know? And there's a lot of other people that were supposed to get him that night but didn't. Apparently I'm not the only one. But he did send me to go get some marijuana, and he needed it. And the drug war is the one who killed John. If John had the cannabis that I had set aside from up north, I'd drive all the way up north to get it, had the best in the world, he would have survived. He would have lived. He would be still here with us. I would have gone and we would have done the movie we were going to do. We were going to travel the world and sing together and everything. So I never wanted to do anything with rock and roll ever again, because being at the very top of the heap and then all of a sudden being the scapegoat for everyone, I went back to college. I went back to college. I got my little degree, and I played in a classical orchestra, because I'm a very good piano player also. And I played in the orchestra for 20 years. I kicked a 50-piece for 20 years. And started playing reggae music, because I was a little bored with all the classical. And I started playing reggae music seriously as a hobby. And I didn't go back to the blues until 2007. And then I started doing rock and roll again, and I got rock and roll. I'm a songwriter, too. I did a lot of jingles and stuff in Hollywood in the old days. But I can write a good tune. I got a lot of tunes. And so the Blues Champions is my homage to my former life with the Blues Brothers, briefly. And also the funk I grew up with in the East Bay. The reggae I played for 10 years when I was playing rock and roll. And I think that I have a really wonderful band and a really great act. And that's why we're also combining it with the Last Prisoner Project, because there's 40,000 pot prisoners. I went to jail for pot. I know how it sucks. I got beat up, and I lost the house I was renting, and all my stuff got trashed over a big bag of pot, because I always had pot. I always still do have pot. It didn't stop me, but it slowed me down, and it pissed me off.
You got popped in 1991, right? So, and you did a stint in jail for a while from that. And coming out of that is kind of how you end up getting hooked up with Dennis Perone and the sort of the pre-Prop 215 rage, right? So, give me a sense of, look, I think we've all been victims of overzealous prosecutors, but when you came out of that situation, meeting Dennis, this is pre-Prop 215. This is just kind of when the AIDS epidemic was hitting pretty hard, and people were talking about legalization of medicinal cannabis, and you jumped right on that train. So give me a sense. I mean, back then there was a handful, like you, Valerie Carell, Dennis. There weren't many that were getting it done. So I'd love to hear about that era.
You bet. I got set up by a guy because I wouldn't sleep with him, which is what happens. The rats and the bullies were running the drug war. And they came in, and apparently they told me I was heavily armed, which my heavy arms is my pit bull, and a rifle. I could hit the side of a barn with a shotgun. I had a shotgun under my bed, unloaded and broken open. So they came in and they tore up my house and beat me up and almost killed my dog. And they found a 5-pound bag of pot. They planted the hard drugs And they said I had 20 pounds and I was going to go to jail unless I turned everybody in. So I didn't turn anybody in, of course. I went to jail. At the time, I got 120 days, and I did 80 days for good behavior. And I came out just pissed off as hell. I knew I was going to jail. I was going to court, and that's when I met Jack Harrer. And Jack sent me to Pimples Tribbett, who sent me to Dennis before knowing I was going to go to jail. So Dennis met me, and I met him at the House of Flowers. And I said, man, I'm going to jail for pot. That really sucks. He says, gee, when are you going to go? I said, I know several months from now. They're still processing as they do. Well, do you want to work in the meantime? So I actually started to work before I went to jail, knowing I was going to jail, in the first cannabis club in all history in Church Street, there in the Castro. And when I met Dennis at the House of Flowers event on that fateful day in April of 1991, I'd actually met Jack in December of 1990 at a speech, and I was going to go to jail. So I ran up to Jack and said, man, I'm going to go to jail for pot. This really sucks. He gave me his book, and I read the book, and that's how I ended up meeting everybody, because I called him up and said, what can I do to help? I met Dennis, and I walked into crisis of the drug war and AIDS and a medical crisis, a humanity crisis, people dying in the streets, and the drug war sending them to jail. They were dying, and they'd have a joint or two or a roach. They'd haul these poor sick people off. And my mother was a Quaker, and she taught us well. And I had to help, and I was going to go to jail anyway. You know, what are they going to do? Call me a felon? I started working for Dennis before I went to jail for pot, because I'm a good, nice kid, you know, and I'm not too scary. They put me as an intake counselor, so I brought people into the club. They had to prove they had AIDS or cancer or something to join the club. So many people. I personally did about 6,000 intakes for Dennis. It was the most incredible crisis of health and humanity and sorrow and cops and jails, and it was just astonishing, and it was stunning. And all I could do was help, because, hey, I already got busted. You know? What are you going to do, bust me again? Okay, good. Let's go to trial. That's what Dennis said. We need a trial. We need a jury of our peers. You know? So that's how I started working for Dennis. And then I worked for him for about 6 months, 7 months, and then I had to go to jail. And I was supposed to be for 120 days. But, man, I did 80 days. I started playing I played keyboards, so I played keyboards in church and had the girls singing in church. Okay. And that's how I got out of jail early, was by singing and playing my way out of jail early for good behavior. But I was pissed. And Dennis had let me call him collect, and I came on radio, had me on the radio from jail, talking about the drug war and stuff, and the fact that there was this big jail and there was only 3 white girls in there. It was me, the hooker, and the check kiter, and then everyone else was black and brown. And that's the general proportion of all the women's jails, you know. That was quite an eye-opener. So
Lynette, with most people when they get out of jail, the first thing that they think about is, you know, I'm going to do whatever I can to sort of stay away from jail. When you got out, the first thing you did was run to, you know, Jack Harrer, Dennis Perrone, start working with, you know, the first pot shop in San Francisco, and then ultimately, you know, you opened your own not soon after. And I gotta say, I'm super impressed, because that was during the time when, like, Melinda Haig and some other overzealous prosecutors from the federal side were really coming after anyone that was in cannabis. So, like, to put yourself out there after already, like, serving a stint in the joint, you know, kind of like, what were you thinking? That you were like, I want to get back in this thing and I want to get back in the fight, instead of saying, okay, I learned my lesson, I'm staying away from weed for a while, just going headlong right back into it?
I read Jack Harrer's book. The truth had set me free. I wasn't crazy, I was right. Marijuana's good. Marijuana's a medicine. I have PTSD from being chased around Hollywood over John Belushi's death. Those suckers wanted me to give up everybody in Hollywood, so I disappeared. I went to the Hells Angels. They hid me out because I was an important person in the underground. You know? I was their wee girl too. You know? I needed pot, and I was told by my family, my dad, who's a federal agent, that I was evil. And I'm not evil. I'm not evil. Jack, look, here's proof jackass. And then Jack sent me to Dennis, knowing the truth that I was right. And then I went to jail, even though I was right, which is really wrong. I got out pissed, and I know the truth, and the truth is what's going to set us free. And the only way that I could get back at those suckers for beating me up and ruining my life and stopping me from singing and chasing me around was to fight, And I mean, it helps that my grandfather was a pirate captain, I guess. I was hurt, and I had nothing to lose. And I had everything to gain.
I've got two questions for you. The first one I want to know is how long you were in for, and the second one is what percentage of your fellow prisoners were in for marijuana?
I was the only pot prisoner at the time. This is in 1991. Everybody else was in there for dope, any kind of dope except pot. And also, I was considered a big pot bust. So I was I had a 120-day sentence, which would have been a lot. They wanted to go for 2 years, but I had a pretty good lawyer, I guess, and got 120 days. So I did 80, and they let me out early because of my work with the church music and the girls' choir inside. But that was enough to piss me off. I mean, I felt so violated all the time. There's no privacy. They could search you anytime you want. Any part of you, they could search you at any time. And I didn't deserve that. And no one else who's in jail for pot deserves to be in jail for pot. Nobody. And I guess I have something called righteous indignation my mom told me about. Because in a Quaker, you're not supposed to be mad or hate anybody, but you can have righteous indignation. And I think that is my fuel. That's my gasoline.
And in your case, what that did was that motivated you to get into a legal battle that was generational, right? It lasted 19 years, and this was what, for your right to operate a marijuana dispensary?
Yes, this is some years later, actually, many years later, because I got out of jail, and I was very righteously indignant. I went back right to work for Dennis on the front lines because they needed somebody trustworthy to be in there working with the patients. I had a prescription for marin-al from Dr. Todd Mikaria, which got me out of the urine testing. And so I was able to work around marijuana and use marijuana even when I was on a very strict probation. And because I moved out of the East Bay into Marin, they put me on a postcard for probation at the time. This is 1991, 1992. And they finally let me go because I was just a little white girl with pot, I'm sure that if I was another person of color, it would have been a much different story. But I also knew that it was important for us to win, so that nothing like that would happen to anybody else like what happened to me. So I'm a good kid. I started working with Dennis again, then we started working on 215. Then I got off probation, and Dennis made me be the major media spokesperson in the 1993, 94. We started lobbying for this medical marijuana, and then the 215 campaign started to happen because I helped get a bunch of money from George Soros, along with Michelle Aldrich, and it all came together because I worked really hard and I put pieces of things together. I was very helpful to Dennis, and I was part of the inner core. Dennis and I worked together every day for 5 years. It was like basically surfing on his wave. Such a genius, And I come up with good ideas, and he'd come out, and the ideas would come together. So then after we won 215. I had a call from the police chief of Fairfax who congratulated me and said, Lynette, now that I understand what this is, and I want to tell you I have officers down. They have cancer. They have AIDS. We can't talk about it. This is 1996, He says, do you know what a use permit is, lady? Have you ever applied for a business license? I said, no, sir. He says, that's what you need. So it was a cop who had sick people that he loved. It was the one who said, you should do this, Lynette. In fact, here's some cop rules that I had to throw all out, 150 of them. No. You can't look at our medical records. So I rewrote the whole thing, inspired by Chief Anderson. And that's what the first license was, ever in all history. I was in Time magazine about this. And I was granted a license to legally sell pot with all these checks and balances and inspections and blah, blah, blah. But it worked to everybody's satisfaction. Everybody was happy with our system. And then I got sued by President Clinton in 1998. And the big marshals came, the guys, they're like 10 feet tall with heavy SWAT gear and everything. handed me a piece of paper, not quite over my doorstep, and we had to go to court. And there was all the, 150 of these SWAT team guys there. It was me and Dennis, and there was 6 of us that got sued. Dennis dropped out, 2 others dropped out, and then it was me, Oakland, and Ukiah. Then Ukiah, she passed away from her illness, and Jeff went in first, and he lost. And then it was me, and I had the only real license. My lawyer and I talked about this many times because we were the test case. We had the only license in the nation, the only license in the world to sell pot legally that was effective and honest and clear and worked to everybody's satisfaction. So I was the biggest danger in the drug war. So they persecuted me and prosecuted me and chased me around by agents again, trying to get information again. And they did everything possible to scare me, to come up to me, to haunt my town, haunt the county of Marin. That's why there's no other dispensaries. We had DEA agents here for 20 years bothering people. And they took my Social Security away. I bankrupted. I lost my club. Finally, after 15 years, Obama's people took the landlord's land. They cheated because they couldn't beat me in court. We have the Constitution, and we have states' rights. And we also have compassion. So when they took the landlord's land, then I had to move, and they were following me like crazy. They had agents posted outside my house for 24 hours for years. I couldn't go anywhere without an agent. I couldn't go to do a speech. I couldn't go to a festival. I couldn't sing. I couldn't do anything because those guys were following me. They were writing down their people's information and license plates and taking pictures. And oh, God. So after I lost my club, I had to rent out my house, and I fled to my secret apartment in West Hollywood, where I was a small fish in a very big pond. And then I had relative quiet there. The different jurisdiction. We stopped at Bakersfield because the Ninth Circuit jurisdiction ends at Bakersfield, and I was free south into the 3rd District, where I had never committed any marijuana crimes, so they couldn't get a warrant for me. And that's where I met Cyril Law, who was one of the founders of the Wu-Tang Clan, and he protected me. And I was with him for 6 years until he died of cancer. So I had a whole other musical family. And then I came home, and I beat the feds. I beat them. We beat them. After 19 years. Because we were the test case to stop the entire cannabis industry. There was no way that I would stop until they either put me in jail or I died. Because we were the test case to stop the entire industry, and we could not stop. And we could not lose. And also I disappeared from the media. This is part of the strategy, because I'm a strategist, because I didn't want anyone to be scared. I wanted them to open up their clubs. I wanted them to negotiate with the town. I wanted the sheriff to accept the fact that they were selling pot for medical purposes legally, even though there was this case going on, and I don't know about the feds, but because of my case, they couldn't go bust anybody else. We preserved the industry while fighting for our lives this whole time. And then we won. And we won for the landlords, too. And that was because Trump came in. And remember when Trump fired all the prosecutors? He fired my prosecutor of 20 years. And then because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, Obama had come after me, he let the whole case go. And my landlord was able to rent to me. And I moved back into this space right here, the same space where I've been at 25 years now. Minus 5 years. 5 years without the club.
So, Lynn, it sounds like you've got some good 420 action going on in the background. So, the audience, if you guys can hear any of the music while Lynnette's speaking, this isn't just sort of background music as she tells the story of her life. It's music that's happening real time at her dispensary up in Fairfax to celebrate the 420 holiday. And so, super cool that you've got people out there doing that. And it actually is a really nice way to listen to you as you're speaking. It kind of provides just like background music for you. So, may we all be so lucky to have theme music. I was going to jump in and ask you, you had said that, there have been some dispensaries, obviously, that came after you that are still in the very early days of the industry. Steve D'Angelo, Etienne Fontaine, some of the stuff that was happening in Santa Cruz. What did you think as you were getting prosecuted and you're watching these other guys now starting to open up? Were you pretty pleased that you had company of other people that were saying we're going to take on the drug war as well, or were you worried about kind of like what the direction was and worried for their safety? I mean, again, anyone that was pre-2000 opening dispensaries in California, I look at as kind of a real pioneer.
I wanted more dispensaries to open with regulation because there's safety in numbers. And I thought that, as it turned out, after so many years, we went back into court in 2015. I was shut down for 4.5 years at that point. And there was thousands of licensed dispensaries across the nation in 2015. There was a lot of progress being made. My wonderful attorney, Greg Anton Crawford, there are thousands of licensed dispensaries in America today. This prosecution of my client has not worked. Why can't she go back to work now that they removed the budget to prosecute medical marijuana, which is how we went? And the prosecution from Washington, D.C. gets up and says, we don't care what anyone else has, she just can't have a dispensary. In open court. And my judge lost his mind, jumped up, and pointed the finger of shame at the prosecution. Do you remember equal justice under the law? And that's exactly what I'd hoped for, is that they were treating me unfairly, but everybody else was going forward. And so that actually helped me win my case for everybody throughout this whole process. Because equal justice, and I could not be treated unfairly anymore.
Absolutely. And Lynette, I want to know how you feel going from that moment in time when, you're first winning and the court is saying you can go ahead and you can do this. And, now we read in the newspaper recently that it's projected that marijuana is going to add $99 billion to the U.S. economy in 2022, including both sales and additional economic impact of those retail sales. And that by 2026, it's projected to add $157 billion into our economy. That's quite a leap forward from when you were just trying to get your first legal dispensary open and operating.
I feel that all the licensed dispensaries are my godchildren. Those are my babies. Every single one. If you went through the hassle of the paperwork and you are trying to bring us and cannabis into the light. And every parent knows that when you'll fight to death for your baby. And the licensed dispensary is my baby, and I fought and fought and fought because that was my baby. And that is as founder of the industry, I'm very pleased to see, despite all the ridiculous, excessive rules and everything, we are finally being assimilated into society. And we're not so evil anymore. And as people realize that the sky isn't going to fall, and that we're of benefit to society and we're not criminals, and they set our 40,000 prisoners free because they're nonviolent and we need them back, then that is the social change that I envisioned when I first met Jack and Dennis years ago. And that's also the vision, I think, that my quick mother instilled with us as children, is the world should be peaceful and happy. And to me, that's what cannabis brings, is peace and love.
Well, Lynette, let me ask you this question then. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on not just the growth of the marijuana industry, but the growth of some of these companies, that are referred to as multi-state operators that are slowly but surely kind of, creeping in and taking more and more control of the marijuana markets. Do you see that as a positive or a negative?
When you go into a liquor store, you can get a cheap bottle of Gallo or a $150 bottle of Mums. Do you see Mums going out of business? No. Grow the Mums a pot. What I've found, because we're in California and we're spoiled and we know what real pot is, that commercial junk isn't selling. And I think I'm going to see cannabis tourism. I think we're going to be finally, we can't do farm to table. I think eventually they're going to drop that silly law and allow people to go to the farm and go have tasting, just like wine tasting. And I think that the California dispensaries will be blessed with excellent organic pot because it's the best in the world. And a lot of the big companies have tried to come in and take over, already packed their bags and left Northern California because the black market has taken over, and we're not going to buy any of their junk. We're not going to buy poison-infested, commercially poorly grown pot. So we know better. And when we do have federal legalization, we'll be able to export the best pot in the world, and then everybody else will know better too. So you all just enjoy your money while you can make it, because it's going to change.
Well, Lynnette, let me ask you about that too, because, when in 2018 in the Farm Bill, when CBD and hemp became legal, right, they said we're taking it off the controlled substance list, and now it's up to the states to decide what they want to do. And one of the things they said is that no state can interfere with interstate commerce. However, a state has a right to say, you can't sell it in my state. You're allowed to drive through my state, but I'm saying you can't sell it here. So I agree with everything you just said, by the way, in terms of the quality of commercial marijuana versus what you can get from California. I was just down in California at the end of February, and it always reminds me just how much better life is for that kind of stuff out on the West Coast. However, what I'm suspecting is going to happen is that a lot of states, like let's say Illinois, may start enacting, protectionist laws like some states do with wine manufacturers, right? To say that unless the marijuana is grown in this state, you can't sell it in this state, because otherwise California will it'll take over the entire country, which would be fine with me, but may not be fine like with some of the other people out there, the Crescos of the world, who are trying to maintain their own businesses and everything, right? So, that's ultimately where I'm really wondering whether there will really be a fully free open market so that I can walk into a dispensary in Illinois and purchase California-grown marijuana.
No matter what is very important to make cannabis and pot and marijuana, whatever you want to call it, a normal part of society. And we've got to get over 100 years of propaganda and hatred and jail and drug war. So eventually, if you look at what they did with alcohol, they did the same thing. We'll let the states do it. And so there was dry states until the 80s. But eventually, everybody has alcohol. There's still weird restrictions here and there in certain areas, whatever, time or. So if a state really doesn't want pot, then they're gonna boost the black market, and they want to keep the illegal market going, then they can ban pot there. But it doesn't work. And as more people have pot in their life, and they use it, and the sky doesn't fall, like I said before, we can become normal as a part of human society, which it should be. That's where it belongs. It's a normal thing, and it's going to take a while, but some pot's better than no pot.
Well, let me ask you about this, Lynnette. What are your thoughts on if there is federal legalization, right? So they say, good, we're going legal. What will that mean to smaller marijuana producers when, like the R.J. Reynolds or the Scott's Grass Seed Company and all of these big, huge multinational corporations that are just chomping at the bit to jump in as soon as their lawyers say it's okay, which will probably happen when we get it legal on a federal basis. Are you, based on where you are and what you do, are you concerned about these big companies coming in and trying to really take over the market?
Lots and lots of money for this little place in anticipation of final federal legalization, which I don't think we're going to see federal legalization for several more years. It's not. I voted for Biden, but he hates pot. I don't carry corporate pot. I don't carry it. We don't want it. They don't buy it. The quality that they've been able to come up with their big money has been crap. I haven't seen any corporate pot that was decent. They don't know what they're doing.
No, but you're a very, very small segmented market, right? I mean, people in your part of the world only want to get, the good quality stuff. But, look, in Illinois, they're selling $1.5 billion worth of this commercially grown marijuana that I agree isn't particularly great, but people here are like, oh, I can buy it legally, and they do. So, that's my concern, right? It's like, look, people can buy fancy beer, they can buy Budweiser, and people buy a hell of a lot of Budweiser beer. which is fine for the people who like it, but then it necessarily forces the creation of, what will be the equivalent of microbreweries in the marijuana side to really provide that special high-quality strains for the connoisseurs who are looking for something better than the general stuff.
Right. Some marijuana is better than no marijuana. And that is, in Illinois, I'm sure that the quality that they were able to get in the black market was inconsistent and hard to get. And I can't be, Northern California will not be taken over by corporate interests. But in places where they don't know how to grow pot and they haven't had access to good, pot, and now there's an availability, even though it's not the best, at least they can get some pot. And like microbreweries, I think that's going to, when it's a normal thing and people are tired of the corporate pot, they're going to look for the microbreweries, the real stuff. And then when we can export the real stuff out of Northern California, and also teach people how to grow properly. This is going to take a dent in the corporate profits, which has always been the enemy, is the dent in the corporate profits. So we will survive no matter what.
So, Lynnette, thanks so much for joining us today. We could listen to you for hours. I mean, the war stories you have to tell about the early days of the cannabis industry and kind of your philosophy on how it's evolving. Really, really cool to have like a real industry warrior here. And for all the people out there that don't understand what Lynnette has done for all of us to allow us to have the industry that we do today, when she says that we're all of her godchildren, I mean, take that to heart, because without, a handful of people, I mean, I joined the cause, 30 years ago. She was here long before I was, and long before most people I knew were, which means that, if I thought that I made an impact in the early days, it's only because people like her were out there, making a real impact, doing real things, getting 215 passed, that we have any industry today. So for everything you've done, thank you so much from the bottom of all of our hearts. And please keep doing it, keep fighting the good fight, and please come back and talk to us again. We'd love to hear it again. If we weren't having some technical issues, we would definitely keep you longer, but go enjoy the 420 holiday. Go enjoy the music, and thanks so much for everything.
Oh, you're welcome. You guys are great. Anytime we can do some more talking, and let's do it. Thank you so much, and love to everyone.
So, let's jump back into some Grateful Dead. I mean, that was amazing. It's so cool to have Lynnette on the show with us. But now let's get back in and let's see if we can't figure out a way to really talk about the rest of that run from the Ark in Boston. And a great time to do it is thinking about sort of the 420 holiday and thinking about the early days of the Grateful Dead. So we've talked about the early days of the weed world. Now let's talk about sort of Primal Dead again. Yeah,
we've been off of Primal Dead for a little while. This is a great run of shows. They really took a liking to it, as you pointed out, so much so that 69-70 is the only year in their existence when they did their New Year's shows outside of the Bay Area, and they did it at the Ark in Boston. It's great stuff, and I think the Dead always had a fondness for the East Coast. Certainly New York City was like a second home for them, but I think that they had a special feeling for the New England area too. And there's just a number of great shows from the Dead from the Boston area, and other great stuff like that. But this is just one example of it. And 1969 was a fun time. They were just really being still introduced to the world and to the folks on the East Coast. And, this is right in the heart of the whole Primal Dead and the suite we always talk about with Dark Star, St. Stephen, the 11, and Love Light. And, they come through here. And, in fact, that first night out of that Foxy Lady Jam, they really dive right into that whole a little space, and then right into the suite of songs there that they were showcasing. And what I love about them is that it's a great time for Dark Star, in my opinion. And the reason is because sometimes I think, 30 to 40-minute Dark Stars, while they can be, entertaining under the right circumstances, can also kind of like be too long. And especially if you're at a party and you're playing music and all of a sudden you get into a Dark Star and people, how long will they sit around and listen to it? But in 69, their Dark Stars were running about 20 minutes in length total. And this is one of them as well. And they've got that very unique sound at the very beginning that sounds like they're using one of those little wooden things we used to use in band class in grade school, with the wood grinding off of each other and a little percussion going on there. And it's a very distinctive sound at the start of the Dark Stars from that era. And, they dive through. I mean, St. Stephen, all of this stuff is also new for them. And this is the peak time for them playing the 11, because by 1970, really this suite of songs was gone. So it's great to listen to. Fantastic choice today.
Yeah, and speaking of the 11, I kind of wanted to listen to a little bit of the one from the second night, which had another Dark Star St. Stephen the 11 Love Light. And it really gives a juxtaposition, because, I started off by saying the Foxy Lady wasn't that hot, and this is kind of, Garcia, paying homage to Hendrix, but didn't really necessarily have the chops. But then you listen to what he does in the 11, and you go, yeah, you know what? He was actually that good even then. He was just playing music that wasn't his own. So, Dan, maybe cue up a little bit of the 11 from 4/22/69, which is the second night of that run.
Such a great song. And I remember Mickey talking about it and saying how much he loved the Deadheads, because they could clap to the very strange time pattern, that they play the 11 in, which is where it gets its name from. And it's such a wonderful tune. But it's a tune that has been remarkably elusive in terms of sounding like itself when played in any of these post-Dead compilations, and that's because it really requires the two guitarists playing off of each other really well, and the vocals, when they're singing, really, filling in right on top of each other. And when Dead and Company does it, Bobby tries to do it by himself, and that just doesn't work. But I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I think J-Rad does a cover of the 11 that's almost as good as the Dead's, because they've got that guitar playing, they've got those vocals down, and that's one of the things that drew me to J-Rad originally, was how well they played the 11. And this is a great version too, of course, so you can never really go wrong. And the clip you pulled is one of my favorite parts of the song, that whole musical crescendo where they just kind of build up, and it's great stuff.
Because normally when I think about the 11, I think about the drum signature, which is, really the 5 beats, 6 beats, where it's like the dun 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 dun. But in this case, it's really the Garcia playing the 11, where it's super pronounced, where you can actually hear every note of his playing the 11 beats in the 4 time. So, when you think about like a really technical, difficult time signature, like what drew me to the 11 when I was young was just how difficult it must be to be able to get that 11/4 time just in general. And I just thought it was just amazing that these guys were able to do it, and do it in such a creative way. But it was really like the part that I picked was purely because it's straight Garcia playing the 11/4 time.
Right. There's no doubt, and I guess that just makes the Deadheads, special and musically gifted, that they can, literally find a way to keep up with that beat. But it's really special, and it comes from a great period in that time. And I think that the other song that you have tagged for us today, Rob, to listen to really quickly here, is also another song that was really getting a lot of play during that time, and unfortunately really fell off the table afterwards, because Alligator is one of those songs that they could play just as a tune, kind of like they do in this version, or like they did on the Fillmore West albums. Shows they take Alligator and they use it as the jumping off point for really, really long jams into Caution, and then other stuff typically more towards the end of the show. But it's such a great tune, right? Because it was one of the first new tunes they wrote after the original album came out, and it's how we got the other one, because it was the other one. It was on the other side of Alligator when they were going to release it, and it's just a fun tune, and maybe it had to die with Pigpen, because it was he really made it special, but. It's fantastic. Dan, can you play that for us?
See, one of the things I love about this, Larry, is not only is it, Pig kind of at its peak, but it's also like one of the rare times where you get full 3-night runs that are full soundboards in 1969. Most of the tapes you're getting from them have been cleaned up, but a lot of them are audiences. But to have a run where it's all boards, where you can actually hear each individual player really well, not only is it Pig, it's also Tom Constantin. So it's, kind of the full lineup of that Primal Dead period. But yeah, I love the Alligators. I love the Alligators during that period, and really wish that that we'd gotten more of sort of that classic Pig blues over the next couple of years. But I'd say 69 for me was, about at the peak of where he was just absolutely crushing it. And then to have it mixed in with like a Mountains of the Moon at the same time, and some of the other, Constantin stuff. Very, very cool.
Indeed. And what I love about Alligator, and I want to make sure I say this right chronologically, is that Cosmic Charlie really has, a couple of elements from Alligator built into it, Caught Up Waiting on a Windy Day, which they kind of sing over and over a little bit in Alligator. And, those are all lines that ultimately make their way into Cosmic Charlie. And I really, really love that, how, one song kind of builds on the other or builds off of the other. And, it's like if you're listening carefully, you can find that thread that takes you from, and Cosmic Charlie was coming out right around the same time, too. So it wasn't like it was something done over a number of years. But, they obviously had a riff that they really liked, and they used it liberally.
Yeah, for sure. And that Alligator we listened to was actually from the 23rd of April. The first thing we listened to was from the 21st. The second clip we listened to was from the 22nd, but the Alligator was from the 23rd. So I tried to pick a little bit from each night, but the entire 3-night run is absolutely worthy of listening to.
Yeah, that's typically the case, with them when they have these kind of runs, and you could flip right through them. And a few times they were kind enough to release, 3-night runs in box sets. A couple of box sets from Winterland in '73 and '77 with complete 3-night runs. A few others, but maybe that'll be something down the road for them to go back and consider doing, because it really is such great music from them at such a great period of time. That it's really fun to listen to, and they do such a good job with it here. One thing that I want to just note before just to jump out of this show for 1 second, and then we can jump back into it, is we keep, kind of talking and teasing about Europe 72. I think next week we're going to finally dive in with the show from Rotterdam, which was Dick Lavatla's favorite show of the entire tour. So that seems appropriate to be a show for us to feature and talk about. But just for the heads who are out there listening and are interested or curious, this now marks the 50th anniversary of the show that they played in Frankfurt, West Germany, at a place called the Jahrhundert Hall, which I'm sure I'm not pronouncing correctly, but which means literally 100-year hall or centennial hall. And in 1995, one of the very first live releases the Dead put out from their vault that wasn't part of their From the Vault or Dick's Picks series was part of this show. It was a disc called 100-Year Hall, and it had a good portion of this show on it. It was the first release that the Dead put out after Jerry's death. And, chronologically kind of came out between Dick's Picks 1 or Dick's Picks 2 and Dick's Picks 3. But it was, I love that when that came out too. So, for people who are keeping an eye on Europe 72, go find 100-Year Hall, or if you want the full show, from April 26, 72 in Frankfurt. And, you'll really, really like that a lot. We'll dive into 50 next week, because you'll find on our show that it's not just the Grateful Dead who are celebrating their 50th anniversaries or birthdays next week, and we'll just leave it mysterious like that until we tune on with you guys. But back to this show, and what's great about it, and I guess we'll get to in a minute when we do the outro, which we're running out of time here very soon, is that we bid you good night. And we've talked about that too, that was a tune that disappeared from the playlist for a really long time. They brought it back at Alpine Valley in 1989, and then eventually they went ahead and played it at Hampton that year as part of the Warlock show, and brought it back. And that's always a fun tune to hear, and a rare chance to really get to hear the boys, do a little a cappella harmonizing on stage.
Yeah, I agree. And I love We Bid You Goodnight. It's one of those things that, when they brought it back, I was pretty thrilled. And 10/16/89 is, for me, the one from Brendan Bernardina that really stands out. And there's a great video of it. So anyone that wants to see what the boys look like doing a cappella, it's definitely worth finding the video of that one, because it's a really, really fun version to listen to.
And that's also was released by them as Nightfall of Diamonds. That's a dead release, the entire show. It's Bobby's birthday on October 16th.
Yeah, it's his 46th birthday.
Right, he comes out just with a blazing Picasso moon, and the whole show just takes off from there. It's great. It's a great show to listen to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, always a pleasure to do this with you, and I had a lot of fun despite the technical issues we were having with Lynette. Hopefully, it comes out cleaner to the audience than it was for us as we were recording it today. But an amazing guest to have on, and for anyone that's interested, take a look at her biography and take a look at what she's done. But for me, I'm always a student of history, so I try to figure out the people that made my life possible and what I'm able to do, especially professionally. And I can tell you that I mean this sincerely. I don't think any of us would be here today doing what we're doing professionally, but for Lynette Shaw and the work that she put in to really take on the feds, to take on Melinda Haig. And may I go on the record saying, go fuck yourself, Melinda Haig. A woman that did absolutely terrible damage to the early days of the cannabis industry. So I'm pleased that she's gone, and I'm devastated by the what she did to people during her reign of terror in the Bay Area. So, and thank you, for the other folks that paved the way in those early days too. I mean, I think from 1991 to 1996, as Prop 215 was getting passed, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the people that are out there gathering signatures, and to the people that funded the effort, whether it was, Ethan Nadelman and his crew, that was funded by Lynn Smith, which turned eventually into the Drug Policy Alliance. There's a handful of people that put their lives and their liberty on the line to make sure that we have a cannabis industry like we do today. And whenever I get a chance to actually have a person like that, within our sphere, to be able to have a chance to interview him, I jump at it, because, I think everyone needs to know the history of how we got there, the same way we need to know, who the influential musicians were, why Bach was influential on Phil Lesh. These are the things that make it important for you to understand kind of the lineage of how you got to where you are today.
You're absolutely right. She's really a unique and special person, with so many fascinating stories. That bit about the Blues Brothers and being involved with them, and being in so tight with Belushi and everything. She's really somebody who, kind of was part of, certainly for me, and maybe a little bit for you too. Part of the culture that we grew up in. High school and college was all about Belushi and the Blues Brothers until he died, and how amazing, all of that was. And we love being able to talk to somebody who's part of all that. And, for me, I think, Rob, the other part about that's nice is every now and then we all just need a big refresher course of the people who really operated with true values. And I don't mean to besmirch anybody when I say this, but, I think there's a lot of big corporations out there that are much more interested in the bottom line of what they do, and they're a business, and I can understand that. And maybe it's just being a tad too naive to really believe that the cannabis industry could really be run as an industry by the really cool people who know what cannabis means to the people who use it and keep it all good like that. But that's just not the way of the world. And the latest example, which we're not going to have time to talk about today, but I'm going to throw it out there because we are going to talk about it next week, is this latest lawsuit that was just filed in Chicago the other day in federal court. And just as it looks like we're reaching a place where there's going to be dispensary licenses issued, a public interest group filed a lawsuit alleging the existence of a Chicago marijuana cartel that, as alleged and reported in the newspaper, includes the Wrigley family, the Pritzker family. I've even seen that possibly U.S. Representative Bobby Rush is being implicated. The Kovler family is being implicated. Obviously, it's a lawsuit, and lawsuits can say whatever they want to say, and they're usually shielded by what we call the litigation privilege, meaning that you can't go back and sue a lawyer for putting stuff in a complaint that's not true if they're trying to prove a case. That doesn't mean that any of it is true, of course, and all of these defendants will have their day to come in and file their answers or their motions to dismiss, and I look forward to seeing all of that, and really want to wait a week to talk about it, because it'll be interesting to see if any of these defendants have initial public comments to to come back with in response to it. But I just find it sad that we've reached a point where there's groups out there that even imagine the possibility of the existence of such a cartel, that such litigation is necessary. And for those who've been paying attention to what's going on in Illinois, it's just another thorn in our side as we attempt to finally, break free of kind of the monopolistic grip that for right now the medical people do have on the adult use market, and get these other 150 licenses issued and get these new faces out there and have a real chance for competition and pricing and all of that. And for us in Illinois, it just kind of feels like a nightmare that's never ending. What was supposed to be such a wonderful thing has literally turned into a nonstop battle as everybody competes for their share of the pie. And I can only hope that we can just wake up one day and say, you know what, screw this. We're just going to be like Oklahoma. You want a license, take it, you're in. And and really get this program off the ground. But that's my 2 cents worth for right now. Maybe we'll have more next week. But just felt compelled that when we're sitting here talking to somebody like Lynette, it's important to remember that you do get what you wish for. And as the industry grows and gets bigger, there are going to be people who are going to get larger and who are going to control a larger share of the market. It doesn't mean they're doing anything wrong. It just means that they've been able to grow and take larger shares of the market. But especially in an industry like marijuana and the types of people who pay attention to it, those people who do reach for a larger share will inevitably come under greater scrutiny. And you have to be prepared to handle that kind of stuff. And I have no doubt that any of the people that have been named in this Chicago cartel are more than sufficient in being able to care for themselves and do what they need to do to put their best face forward.
Yep, well said, Larry. Really well said. Well, I'd love to have Lynette back some other time, if nothing else, just to talk to her for another half an hour about what it was like selling Hell's Angels cannabis back in the 70s. If she could tell me stories about what it was like dealing with, Terry the Tramp and some of the other guys. They're the Sonny Barger, the famous Oakland Hell's Angels, the East Bay Hell's Angels.
Sonny Barger, right.
That would be entertaining enough, especially coming from someone that was probably in their late teens when it was happening.
But don't you think that if you're selling to the Hell's Angels, that you'd always err on the side of like 3 extra buds? Okay, this says it's I'm going to throw in a few. I'm not going to fuck around with this.
Your bags are never light when you're selling to the Hell's Angels.
Not at all. Not at all.
Well, happy 420 to you, Larry, and happy 420 to you, America, and to the rest of the world. And hopefully everyone's having a great day. And again, I know you're not going to hear this until after the holiday's over, but for all of you out there, I hope you had a great 420. And we're super stoked to keep bringing you fun content and fun guests over the next couple months.
Absolutely. We've got a lot of good things lined up. There's a lot of great shows coming up we're going to talk about, including next week. Please tune in for this show from Rotterdam for the 50th anniversary of Europe 72. It is, Dick Lavatla's favorite. It's just such a tremendous show. We made reference to it last year, but we didn't really talk about it. But this year we're going to do a deep dive on that. We have some other great guests coming up down the road, and we appreciate everyone taking the time to tune in and listen to us once a week. So, on behalf of Rob Hunt from sunny California and Larry Mishkin from overcast and rainy Chicago, thank you everyone for listening. Have a good week. Stay safe and enjoy your cannabis responsibly. And on the way out, Dan, why don't you give us a little bit of We Bid You Good Night from Boston, April 23rd, Rob?
And I bid you good night. Good night. Good night. And I bid you good night. Good night. Good night. Walking in Jerusalem just like a good night. Good night. Tenderly, the altar, wonderful. Good night. Good night. Good night. And before the beast at the end of the woods, good night. Good night. Good night.
Hi, y'all. I'm Joe, host of Casually Baked the podcast. If you're curious to explore the highly responsible side of cannabis, farming, and legalization, I'm here to help lighten the stigma and build your canna confidence. Download episodes now of Casually Baked the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And journey with me through the evolving cannabis culture and discover how and why people like you are adding cannabis to their wellness toolkit. It's time to get casually baked.